in
We don't have any attendees yet. Hello, everyone. Hello, Medrin, Daniel, Dixon, John, Sarah. Thank you so much for joining the webinar. So we'll give us at least 1 minute to allow others to join. We can have a good quorum. Thank you so much for finding time to join today's webinar. And I would urge all of us to just drop something on the chat box. Yeah, say hello to us and then where you're from so that we can get to know you. And also relate our webinar to your respective countries. If you are logging in with a name that is not recognized by the Academy, kindly change it because it will have an effect on the attendance roster. I'm seeing here iPhone. Whoever is using iPhone, please just rename your device to your official name that you are using for the Academy. So it's 4 minutes past the hour. We can start. Thank you so much, guys, for joining the webinar. We really appreciate your time. We really appreciate your commitment to this webinar today. I'd like to welcome you again and again for the webinar. We're beginning right now. And then also throughout the webinar, we have been speaking about the pitch competition that we'll be having and during the last week of the Academy. We actually urge you all to and encourage you to start preparing a pitch presentation. By now you have started preparing them, I hope so. And we will open the pitch presentation will start next week. And submissions are due on 11th of November, 30th, 2024. So please, if you've not been working on your pitch presentation, kindly remember that the submissions are due on 11th. No, sorry, the submissions are due on November 30th by 11 p.m. So please work on your presentations and send them before the deadline because there'll be no extension. I'll introduce myself. My name is Joyce Shikuku, and I'm the East Africa Regional Coordinator for Wales Mountain Initiative, and I live in Kenya. Today, we are going to talk about branding. How are we branding our businesses or our projects or community-based organizations? During the previous years, we've talked about budgeting, how to manage finances, and then how to create your team, how to brand, creating your brand identity, branding guide. So today we want to talk about how we're going to brand our identity, and we have our able presenter here. She's called Brenda Odhiambo. Brenda is a seasoned communication specialist with over 9 years of experience in corporate communications and public relations across various sessions in sub-Saharan Africa. She excels in leadership, communication strategy across functional project management and stakeholder management. She has a track record of successfully managing public relations and communication initiatives for organizations in higher education, technology, banking, media industries, and NGOs in Kenya and East Africa. Brenda currently serves as the communications lead for the MasterCard Foundation Scholars Program at the MasterCard Foundation Scholars Program, e-learning initiative at United States International University, Africa. Overseeing the planning, development, and implementation of communication strategies, Brenda holds a Bachelor of Arts in Journalism and Mass Communications with a first-class honors. from the University of Nairobi and a Master of Arts in Communication Studies, specific measuring on public relations and concentration from the same institution. She has been recognized for outstanding work ethic, twice winning the award for best work ethic at a previous employer. Brenda, welcome on board and please take it away.
Thank you, Joyce, and hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to have all of you on the call, and I look forward to us having a fruitful conversation. So to start us off, okay, something has happened.
Yes,
so the
Brenda,
definition of branding.
I'm seeing that there's that black line again. I don't know if it has any effect on your words in the presentation.
No, it does not. It disappears. So when we talk about branding, when we talk about branding, we're essentially talking about the process of trying to differentiate ourselves from our competitors, right? And so branding, or a brand more specifically, can be a place, it can be a service, it can be a company, it could be a person, and it could be even yourselves as a personal brand. So I'll skip this exercise for now. We'll come back to it later. And we'll jump into the definition of product versus brand. A product essentially is something that you can replace with something else, right? In the current economic times, I know most of us are not really keen. You're going to where you can save money, right? But there's some specific things that you use that perhaps you find that you can never want to replace what they are, right? Then I'll bring us to the example of water. We all know water is a commonly naturally occurring resource, but you find that we are able to have so many different brands of water. And it's simply because each of these companies has been able to create a strong brand, right? So essentially here, the product is water, but you have all these different brands trying to compete for share of wallet, right? So in summary here, we can say that a brand cannot be replaced by something else, and a commodity is something you can replace with something else, right? And what brands do is that they exist as preferences in the mind of the consumer, right? In terms of branding imperatives, you must be consistent in how you communicate your strong brand idea, right? For the Kenyans in the room, an example of Safaricom, right? Their main message over and over is, we are helping you, we are working with you, we are here for you, right? You must acknowledge the fact that we live in a branded world. And so for your enterprises, you must seek to position yourselves as competitively as you can, right? Brands must make promises and they must keep their promise, right? So it's not enough for you maybe to say that, you're quick to turn around customer inquiries. Demonstrate it, right? And then lastly, you must identify the brand touch points. So which are these places that the consumer comes into contact with you, and how can you make sure that your brand experience at those points works for them? So when you talk about when to start the branding process, normally the most common one is when you have a new company and a new product, right? So you want to launch your business, you want to launch a specific product, you start the branding process. The other place where you could have a new brand is perhaps maybe when you're changing your name, right? So some names really mean a lot to companies, and they also mean a lot to people. So it could be either you're choosing to rename your business, maybe you're renaming a product, maybe you found yourself in a crisis and you want to distance yourself from the connotations those names have for the public, right? You could revitalize a brand or your brand identity. So perhaps you started your company in Kenya and now you're thinking, I want to go global to East Africa, right? So which name or which brand would be best suited to communicate across all the target audiences that you want to reach, right? In terms of revitalizing a brand identity, sometimes you find that maybe you have 80 different products across 80 different channels. So how can you bring all this into a cohesive brand that then can be able to help you achieve whatever goals you want to achieve, right? Sometimes you have merged or you have made an acquisition of another company. You decide that you want to create a consistent brand for whichever company you've now come up with, right? You have to create an integrated system, right? So you find that you have a lot of brands or you have a lot of competing interests, and all of these things sort of communicate in a way that is different from each other. So essentially, here your branding will be to harmonize your brand communication to your audience, right? We have some myths and facts about brand. And the first myth normally is that branding is about logos, but essentially branding is about creating meaning around a logo, right? So you can have a flashy logo, but if you're not creating or if you're not demonstrating value to me, then your logo is useless, right? The other myth is that great brands make great promises, but the fact is that you must keep the promise you're making. So if you tell me that my deliveries will be done under 1 hour, then let it be that, right? The other myth is that branding is an expense, but the fact is that branding is an investment, right? It is something that you have to keep pouring money into, pouring time, pouring resources, pouring strategic intent behind it for it to grow. And tied to that is the fact that brands are a strategic asset, right? Instead of a tactical tool. So this means that maybe you want to launch a new product, you don't just stamp the brand. Or conversely, if you want to launch a new product, then the brand that you've built right now can be able to help you expand elsewhere. The other myth is that brand responsibility sits with marketing, but the truth is that it sits with the CEO. If there's no understanding right from the top about what brand that we're building, then you find sort of everyone does things that could certainly be sabotaging your brand, right? The other myth is that companies create brand value, but the truth is that we co-create brand value with their stakeholders. One of the ways that you could do this is, right now on social media, we see a rise of user-generated content, right? So as a consumer, I want to feel that, I told you that your product packaging is poor. And you come back and say, actually, we fixed our product packaging. If you go to the shelves right now, you will find that our packaging has improved. So those interactions are what we call co-creating your value with your stakeholders, right? Brands matter because one, they increase the level of cash flow. So if you have a strong brand, you're able to attract a bigger corner of the market, and you're able to charge a premium for whatever product or service you're offering. The second is that brands accelerate cash flow, right? If you have a strong brand, it means that you're able to do brand extensions a bit faster than your competitors would be able to. The third is that brand extends duration of the cash flow, right? So if you have a strong brand, if I have a brand that is making and keeping promises, then I have a higher customer loyalty, right? And we all know that loyal customers eventually translate into brand ambassadors. And then lastly, brands reduce the risk attached to future cash flow because they create higher barriers to entry, right? So again, for the Kenyans, Safaricom and Airtel now in its fourth iteration, right? The fact that Safaricom has been able to build such a strong brand, it means that regardless of the telcos that come into the industry, they're unable to compete, right? And so Safaricom has over the years become a telco giant in East Africa, right? The advantages of a brand, the first is that it gives you improved perceptions of product performance. Think about people with iPhones, the fact that I've used an iPhone and the fact that I know what the brand stands for, it means that when I encounter a MacBook, I will buy it without second chance. If I see the AirPods, I will buy it the second chance, given a chance, solely based on this one brand that they've built, right? The second is that it promotes greater loyalty. So if I know that maybe using Ariel to wash my laundry has worked over the years for me, then of course, when I go to buy washing powder, I know to reach for Ariel, right? The third is that it makes you less vulnerable to crisis. Think of the fact that we said that making promises and keeping promises. So of course, when you have a slip up here and there, based on the consistency that you've had, someone is able to, say, okay, maybe they might be in a crisis, but it's probably just the first time, or it's probably an anomaly, right? Of course, self-explanatory, larger margins, right? People are willing to pay for what they value. So if they value your brand, they are willing to pay whatever price you put upon it, right? It gives you opportunities for brand extension. So if you have a strong brand, think of the example of KFC. You know, they came from America, now they're in South Africa, they're in Kenya, they're everywhere. Strongly of the brand that they've been able to build. It makes you less vulnerable to competition, right? So of course, if I'm loyal to your brand, it means that regardless of the cost, regardless of the time needed to get to your brand, I will remain loyal. It is what I will want to pay to use, right? So coming into creating your brand identity. So this is essentially the visual and emotional representation of your brand, right? So things like your brand logo, your color palette, your typography, the kind of photos you use, the kind of messaging you even use, are used to convey your brand personality and convey its values, right? So brand identity and brand image, right? There's a difference between these two things, although they tend to be quite close, right? So brand identity is what you want the audience to perceive of you, right? So for you in your head, you think, you know, I'm an international university, I'm quite affordable, I am dually accredited. So that is your brand identity, right? But the brand image is what comes from the audience. So in this example, then, you know, for you, you think you're dually accredited, but someone else brand image would be like, hey, I cannot afford to study at this institution. They're probably very expensive, so I will keep off, right? And then, as we've said, branding is the process of creating a brand and implementing a strong brand strategy to increase your awareness and grow your business, right? So, of course, we've said this, the benefits of a strong brand identity. So, strong first impression, you know, trust and credibility because I have a standard by which I can peg your performance, customer recognition because a distinct brand makes you easy to pick out amongst your competitors, simplifies decision making for your customers. It enhances your marketing efforts. Sometimes you find that, yes, you've built a brand, but it's somehow just not connecting with the audience, right? And then lastly, it adds value to your business, right? So again, our example of the iPhone and the iMac, right? Strictly off Apple's positioning in the market, right? So you have to develop your brand strategy. That's the first point of developing your brand identity. So a brand strategy is essentially the unifying idea around all your communication, all your behavior, all your actions as a brand are aligned, right? Of course, a great brand strategy is one that will, one, differentiate you very strongly from the market and deflect your competition, right? So here you're looking at your brand positioning, right? So positioning is essentially which space do you occupy in the customer's mind? You know, maybe are you a premium product, right? And then you come to differentiation. So what sets you apart? Maybe in my case, I'm a dually accredited institution, right? Already you've blown 90% of your competition out of the water. Your competitive advantage. So what is it that makes you stand out, right? And that is tied to your unique value proposition, right? So in terms of your strategy, this is not a task solely for marketing, right? It is a unified effort from the CEO to the sales team to the advertising team. So basically, everyone must come on board, right? And when we talk about it or when you see it like this, it's simply like the example of customer service and customer experience, right? So customer experience, allow me to diverge, is the experience that I will get regardless of where I start interacting with your brand. While customer service is a bit more reactive. So in this case, developing a brand strategy is an extremely proactive process and it must be done by everyone. Everyone must feel like they own it. Otherwise, if you don't create that sense of ownership, then you're setting yourself up for failure, right? The second aspect is to develop the big idea, right? So, what is this that you want to communicate, right? So, this is the sort of, can I call it the tagline that will drive all your communication, right? Maybe you're telling people to just do it, right? Like Nike. So how are you going to cascade that across the organization, right? And then the third one is to identify your brand purpose, right? So what value do you exist to serve, or what are you serving, right? So an important thing to note here is that more and more you find that our consumers are very sensitive about the kind of purpose that our brand has. So it's no longer just enough to say, okay, you know what, I sell alcohol or I sell shoes, but beyond that, right? What are your sustainability initiatives? What are you doing for the community? And in the example of our illustration here, this is a shoe company in the UK. And for them, they say, you know, we share affordable. Our mission is to share or to get people to access affordable shoes. But beyond that, they commit and say that their brand purpose is to ensure that a third of their profits go back to the community, right? And so just based on the strength of that, being very clear about the purpose, you know, people bought more shoes because they know the more they buy, then there's someone else who's going to benefit out of it, right? And then in terms of purpose, some of the things that you want to consider, you know, what impact do you want to make when you started your business, right? And how does your brand purpose make the customers' lives better, right? So essentially, the main thing that you need to really come down to is what value are you giving to the customer, right? So define that, and then that becomes your brand purpose, right? The other aspect is to know your target audience, right? So sometimes you find that you have a great brand, but you're really not connecting with your target audience, right? So here, one of the ways to know your target audience, look at the kind of information you get maybe around the kind of person that you sell to, right? So where are they consuming their content from, right? Which kind of language do they use to communicate, right? Who are your competitors in the market, right? How do your competitors communicate with them, right? What are they looking for when they are engaging on what they're seeking to engage with a brand like yours, right? And then come up with a list of adjectives that describe your ideal customer, right? Going back to the example of our institution of higher learning, right? We can say that maybe our student is someone who is 18 years old, right? They live in the major metropolitan areas, right? So it is New York, it is Kenya, it is Nairobi, wherever, right? In terms of information they consume, we can say that our target audience consumes information from the newspapers, from social media, from radio. And then our target audience, of course, or rather our competitors then become the other academic institutions, right? So once you've sort of come up with your brand persona, then it really makes it easy for you to target your messaging, to target your channel selection, to target even the kind of imagery and even the kind of timing that you use when you're communicating to them, right? Knowing your competitors is also extremely important. It's fantastic that you feel like your brand is the best thing to happen to the market, which is fine. But what are your competitors doing, right? And so here you'll do a SWOT analysis, right? So think about your strengths, think about your weaknesses, think about what are some of the opportunities you could explore, and what are some of the threats, right? And so when you do a deep dive into this SWOT analysis, you can be able to find a new path that maybe you had not thought of, right? Which will make you then even more unique in the minds of your competitors, right? The other aspect is to develop your brand architecture, right? And this essentially is the hierarchy of brands within a single company, right? So here you look at a company like Unilever, for instance, right? So Unilever are in personal care products. They are selling, you know, food items. They're selling diapers. They're selling all sorts of things, right? So brand architecture essentially wants to look at all these elements of your brand or all these things that you're doing, right? How are they all communicating towards the single brand, which is Unilever, right? So yes, they may have different tonalities or different requirements in terms of branding, but ultimately they're all telling one brand story, right? So some of the key questions to ask yourself. So what are some of the benefits of leveraging the name of the company, right? Sometimes maybe you could find in a specific space, maybe your brand was negatively mentioned. So you can decide, okay, let us divorce this product name from our brand architecture, right? Will co-branding confuse customers, right? If I see maybe it is Unilever and something, will I be confused and not buy it because I'm unsure of what it is, right? Perhaps maybe you want to change the name or build on existing equity. So here in the case of merger and acquisition, right? Which of your brands was the strongest and which one can you leverage best to make sure that you retain and grow your market share, right? In terms of brand architecture, this is an example, right? So the parent company here is FedEx, right? But they've expanded over the years and they have, FedEx Ground, FedEx Freight, FedEx Office. So all these are part of the architecture, right? And as you can see here, each of them has its own word mark, right? So the parent brand, they leverage that, but each of them has its own word mark, represent the various businesses that they've gone into, right? In terms of brand architecture, we have the monolithic brand architecture. So here you have the strong single master brand, right? And here an example of Google, right? So you have Google Drive, Google Maps, Google Pay, etc, 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 right? And so for monolithic brand architecture, here you're using the name of the parent company and the name of the service or the name of the product that you're providing, right? The other type of brand architecture is endorsed brand architecture, right? So here the product has a clearly defined market presence, but you still benefit from the association with the parent company. So we say the iPod and Apple, right? Polo and Ralph Lauren, US Navy and Navy SEAL. So there's that synergy between the parent company and whatever it is that you're selling, right? The other one is pluralistic brand architecture. So here you have a series of well-known consumer brands under one house, which perhaps may not be as well known, right? So you find brands have entirely their own ways of naming, they have their own conventions of communicating, but you really have to sit down and find out, okay, so who is the maker, right? So you find things like Kleenex and a Kimberly Clark, KFC and a Yum brand. So you don't know who the parent company is. You only know that I love KFC, right? And then brand elements. So these are the things like your logo, your product symbol, your word marks, your colors, right? Which help us to build brand awareness and which in turn contribute to our corporate image, right? So some of the various aspects, we'll discuss them in the next slide. Of course, the first is the brand name, right? So this is the thing that will first set you aside from your competitors, right? And sometimes you like to think it's a very easy process, but the truth is that it can take quite a while to really come up with a name, right? And we say that the right name should be easy to pronounce. It should be something that sticks in your head because it's something that people will be saying over and over and over again. So you really have to take the time to find out a strong name for your brand, right? So some of the myths that we have, we say that naming a company is easy. It's just like choosing a name for your child, which I'm sure all of us know it's also not an easy process, right? Because yes, you might have a great idea for a name, but you find that maybe someone has patented it and you have to change, right? Others think that you will know the name when you hear it, but the truth is that it might sound great to you, but it will not sound great to your customer. So you have to have that balance, right? You cannot afford to test the name. It's very important that you test how the name performs, right? Maybe you could find that the name is conflicting with one of the aspects of your brand, or maybe you find that your name is very similar to a customer's name. So what do you do in that case, right? The characteristics of an effective name, it is meaningful. So here the name should be able to tell you something about the essence of a brand, right? So what do you want to come across when you talk about or someone says your name? right? It should be distinctive, so easy to remember, very unique, easy to pronounce, and easy to spell, right? It is future oriented. So it's not just a name for now. It is something that will work for the company as it evolves, right? It should be modular. So here it means that it can help you build brand extensions with ease, right? Protectable, it is something that can be owned and trademarked, right? So it's not something where someone will come and argue on a technicality and then it is taken away from you, right? It should be positive, especially in the markets that you serve. So if you plan to expand the reach of your brand, think about how your brand name will sound in different markets, right? And sometimes you find that there are cases whereby you find a product is known by a specific name in this country and then another name in another country. So it's because they've thought about all these things, right? And then lastly, the visual aspect. It must look great in a logo, it must look great in a word mark, and it must make sense for your brand, right? So an example here I would give is some misinterpreted brand names. So the first one is called Irish Mist, a type of whiskey. But you find that in Germany, mist means manure. So that means that if this product were to extend to Germany, they would have to change their name, right? The second is a French soda brand. If you say the name out loud, it's shit, right? I mean, the name comes from the sound that the can makes when it's opened, but you can see how that name would not translate elsewhere. The third one is called Bon Cafe. When you say someone is bonkers, I'm sure we can only infer what that means, right? So types of brand names, the first is the founder, which tends to be the common ones. So Tory Burch, Ben and Jerry's, Martha Stewart, the Kenyans will know Mudo Kinju, who sell paint. So founders' names, right? Descriptive names. So these ones convey the nature of the business, right? Toys R Us, they sell toys, right? So the benefit of this kind of name is that it clearly communicates your intent, but the downside is that as you continue evolving, the name becomes limiting, right? The third aspect is fabricated names, Pinterest, Kodak, TiVo. So these ones are advantageous because they can be able to be quickly trademarked, although sometimes you really have to take time to create that association between the name and your brand, right? The metaphor, right? So here are things like people's names, names of animals, mythological names, right? So Nike, named after the Greek goddess of, is it war? Quartz, Patagonia, right? So metaphorical names, right? Acronyms, right? So these are the names that are difficult to remember. So IBM, right? International Business Machine, and GE, General Electric, right? And then acronyms sometimes are very difficult to learn and require you to keep refreshing your audience's name, right? So DKNY, I'm sure if I did a poll, no one can be able to tell me what that is, right? CNN, MoMA, right? Magic spelling, right? So here you have the word, maybe it describes what your product or service does, and then you strike off one letter and you get your unique name, right? Combinations of the above. So great names combine all these aspects, and you find that it helps you to create a name that your audience can understand better, right? The second brand element is the tagline. So this is basically a phrase that captures your brand essence, your personality, and your positioning, right? So think about Coca-Cola, right? They tell you to open happiness, right? Nike will tell you just do it, right? And the best part about this is that when you choose a tagline that has a long life, then it means you're able to change it over and over to suit whatever campaign it is that you're doing, right? And then types of taglines, imperative. So these ones command you to take an action, right? So Apple, think different. YouTube, broadcast yourself. Nike, just do it, right? Descriptive taglines. So these ones describe the product, service, or brand promise, right? TED, ideas worth spreading. Superlative, positioning the company as the best in the class. So De Beers will tell you a diamond is forever. BMW will tell you the ultimate driving machine, right? Provocative, right? So they ask you a question, right? Specific, reveals the business category. So love the skin you're in. Of course, when you hear that, you know that they probably deal in skincare, right? Logos and symbols, right? Most of us, this tends to be what we understand branding as, right? So logos must have meaning for the stakeholders, right? So yes, your logo is fancy, your logo is colorful, but what does it mean for me, right? For instance, when I see an Apple logo in the shop, I know that I'm getting premium quality at a premium price, right? That has been tested and tried. So when I see that logo, it has that meaning for me, and that drives my consumption of the brand, right? So types of marks. The first is a word mark, right? So here you have an acronym or the company name or a product name that has been designed and conveys a brand attitude, right? So if we look at the example of Google, right, the colors, the primary colors, most of us associate primary colors with fun, right, with good things. And we find that Google is very lighthearted, but when you look at the kind of the data that they're collecting about you, stops being very fun and lighthearted, right? Unilever, right? This is a letter form. So here, if your company maybe starts with B, you have a stylized B or a stylized R, whatever you choose, right? And then an emblem whereby the image is connected to a pictorial element. So of course, when you see this emblem, I don't need to tell you that that is the Starbucks logo, right? You'll already infer it just from that, right? Pictorial marks. So here you have a picture that has been stylized, right? Like this apple that has been beaten into, all of us knows what it means, right? Abstract or symbolic marks. So these ones are basically ambiguous, right? Maybe if you read the rationale behind the brand, they tell you, just do it, right? And it means something for them, right? Sometimes you have characters, right? I'm sure all of us have seen this character in several movies, and so it embodies some brand attributes or values, right? And here you can also look at things like mascots, right? Ronald the Donald, right? For McDonald's, right? And those icons mean something else, right? Although sometimes you find that the more you use them, and I'm sure if you look at the movies when they were celebrating their 100 years, they give you a graphical history of how the character evolved over the years as their brand evolved, right? The signature. So this is the relationship between your logotype, your brand mark, and your tagline, right? And most of your logos will be represented like this, right? So the logotype, this is the font or how your company name will be written, right? Their tagline here is for a better life, right? So the signature is all this. So the logotype plus your tagline plus the brand mark, which is this square, right? The other aspect is typography, right? So these are the kinds of fonts, the kind of lettering that you use and are related to your brand. I'm sure each time you see the variation of the first font, you're quickly able to connect it to Coca-Cola, right? You have the serif fonts, so the kinds of fonts you could use. So these ones signify traditionality, they signify classical, they signify reliability, right? And examples here, Times New Roman, Bodoni, Garamond, all that, right? Sans serif, here when you want to communicate that your brand is clean, it's contemporary, these are the fonts that you use, right? Droid Sans, Helvetica, Verdana, Futura, all of that, right? Then script fonts. So if you want to convey luxury, or if you want to convey that your brand is fancy, these are the fonts that you rely on, right? Handwritten. So arty, informal or fun. So here you want to position your brand as being fresh and youthful. You go for a handwritten script, right? You must choose a brand identity that matches your or brand fonts that match your brand identity. So imagine if a technology company had its copy written in Comic Sans, you'd not take that seriously, right? So of course, if you want elegance, you can use thin sans serif fonts. If you want conservative corporate feels, you use traditional serif fonts. If you want to come across as youthful, you use thick and rounded fonts. You can use bold serif headers, to create trustworthiness, and so on and so forth. So the key here is to know what plays up to one, your brand personality, and what would also engage your audience, right? So the other aspect is color, right? And here you must be extremely careful about the colors that you choose, right? And sometimes color is not just, I love blue, therefore my brand will be blue, right? You really have to think about the color psychology, right? What does the color mean for a person, right? For instance, if you go to China, if you go to Asian countries and you open a financial bank, but your logo or your logotype does not have red, no one will bank with you because for them, red means an auspicious color, right? So here, an example for food and restaurants, right? They tend to use warm colors that evoke appetite, right? So greens, oranges, yellows, right? To just show the vibrancy that their food has, right? For tech companies, most of them go for blue, which symbolizes intelligence, efficiency, and trust, right? For those that want to tell you that our brand is optimistic and quirky, maybe incorporate some orange, maybe incorporate some lime green, just to bring that out, right? Health and wellness, again, most of them tend to choose blue as a color, green as a color to show that wholesomeness, to show healing, right? Of course, here, if you used red in your name, then, it sort of signifies danger and might drive away, uh, you know, your companies, right? In terms of selecting your brand colors, so what is your core color, which is going to be the one most associated with your brand? In our example here in the illustration, we have Tiffany blue, right? Which they've even gone ahead to trademark it because it's part of their brand, right? So in terms of your secondary color, so once you have a brand color, maybe it is blue, right? Which other colors will complement the blue, right? So you could choose to go for analogous color schemes. So these are close variants of your primary color. So maybe if you have red, you can choose to go with orange and yellow, right? Because they're sort of in the same color family, right? You could choose to go for monochromatic color schemes. So these are tints of your primary color. So if you have royal blue, maybe you can say light blue and dark blue, right? If you have black, maybe you could have dark gray and a light gray, right? Contrasting color schemes, these are basically complementary colors that are across each other on the color wheel. So they really make your logo pop or your text pop, right? Neutral colors. So sometimes we tend to focus so much on the primary brand colors and you overlook the neutrals, right? Neutral colors are very important, especially when you're producing documentation, for instance, right? You cannot have maybe a colored document. So you decide you're going to have a neutral color scheme to make sure that when you're printing a document, the logo stands out, right? Like in this case of Uber, right? So in terms of implementing strategies to establish your brand identity, we've already discussed that brand identity is built over time. And one of the ways you could build it is using a robust social media presence. So here you're communicating with your target audience on whichever channel that you can find them on, right? Internally, you must make sure that everyone understands what your brand identity is and what it means to the success of the organization, right? So that you don't have cases where people are applying their own logos or using typefaces that don't work for your brand, right? Additionally, you can make sure that you create a PR strategy. So here you can work with a specialist and just see what placements would work best for your brand, right? Do you want to be in the media? Which media do you want to be on, right? Which interviews do you want to take, right? Things like making sure that your website and your online reputations match the brand goals, right? We've all had experiences with brands who really tell you how they are customer centric, but half the time their services are down when you call them. They don't respond, and yet they are telling you that they're customer centric, right? And then brand reviews. So it's great that you have a brand, it's standing out, it's in the market, but you need to evaluate it from time to time. Is it still doing the thing that you said it will do? Or more specifically, if your audience is evolving, right? Maybe you targeted it for teenagers. Your teenagers are now finishing campus and they're entering the brand or they're entering the marketplace. So how are you evolving to fit that, right? Sometimes you find that things just change in the market. So people are no longer looking for the attribute of your brand X, right? They're looking for something else. So how do you change that, right? Sometimes you want to review a brand if you've been caught in a scandal, right? Maybe I'm a hospital and several patients have died. I want to distance myself from that. How do I then review my brand to make sure that I'm still able to complete, right? So brand reviews also need you to be very careful to the customer experience. Remember that we said the customer experience is the responsibility of each and everyone, right? Because it doesn't matter where I start engaging with you, I must have great experience, right? So fixing things like poor product, poor customer service, right? Poorly rendering websites, all these things help you to refocus and re-strategize your brand, right? And in terms of measuring brand performance, you have to look at how your brand is doing, right? So the first thing you could do here is a brand audit. So here you're looking at the state of the brand. What are the main words associated with your brand? What do people think about your brand? Where have you been able to build brand equity, right? And how can you build upon that? And then a tracking study. So here you can look at the brand over time, right? So maybe every year at the end, you're saying, okay, this is my brand that I've built. This is how it is doing. These are some of the sentiments that people have about my brand. These are some of the insights then I can use to make sense of my brand, right? So we have the brand report card, which essentially helps you to judge the health of branding in your organization, right? The first is that your brand portfolio and hierarchy should make sense, right? So think about your brand as Toyota, right? And then I say that tomorrow Toyota is launching a line of handbags. People will not buy those handbags because they're trying to leverage in a place that it does not make sense for their brand hierarchy, right? The brand must be properly positioned, right? A strong brand is a brand that has been consistent over the years to develop a strong positioning for its target segment, right? So Toyotas are reliable, Mercedes are the height of engineering, BMW is the ultimate driving existence, right? Then the third, you're delivering the benefits that consumers really want, right? So yes, I am innovative, or I position myself as innovative, but are my products really innovative, right? Are they cutting edge, right? And then the brand is given proper stint support, right? Sometimes you find that, yes, you have brands and maybe the company grows and grows and, some brands sort of just fall on the wayside, right? And you must be very aware about the strategic path of your brand, right? So the example of Nokia and BlackBerry, right? They were very strong brands at the height of the field at some point, but initially they sort of just went off or fell off because there was no sustained interest in the strength of the brand, right? You must monitor the sources of brand equity. So which are some of the places that you're really getting top marks for your brand? Maybe it is CSR, maybe it is customer centricity, maybe it is quality product from an affordable price. Figure out how to make those things make money for you, right? You must understand what the brand means to customers, right? So I'll give an example of our institution, right? Our tagline is education to take you places, right? And over the years, you find people really asking, so when you guys say education to take you places, what does it mean? I think we should change that, right? And when you ask people here, what they think of that change, people are extremely opposed to it because they know exactly what it is the brand means to them, right? In terms of your brand essence, this is the single most compelling thing about your brand that differentiates it from your competitors, right? So Volvo will tell you they are safe travel. Disney will tell you that they give you fun family entertainment, right? So there are 6 contributing elements of brand essence. The first is authenticity, right? So here, if you make a promise and you don't keep the promise, then your brand will be rejected, right? So as a consumer, I expect you to be genuine and truthful with me, right? The other aspect is consistency and coherence, right? So on one occasion, you called my customer care, I answered. On the other occasion, I call you, your phones never go through. You're inconsistent, right? Uniqueness. So how different are you from your competitors, right? What is it that makes you stand out from your competitors, right? The relevance of value, right? Yes, you're giving me business or service X and product Y, but are they really meeting the value, or are they really meeting the needs that I've told you I want met? Right? Then we have durability, right? The brand essence remains the same over time, right? So regardless of logo change, regardless of color change, I know that if I buy an Apple product, then I know I'm expecting technological innovation, right? Single-mindedness. So you're sticking to one thing about the brand that keeps you focused. So, today you're not telling me you're in tech, tomorrow you're in fashion, the other day you're banking. So figure out what works for you and stick there, right? Brand voice and tone, you must stay on message, right? Like we've discussed in brand architecture, all our brands must speak with one voice, right? So your message must be memorable, it must be identifiable, and you always must center it on the customer, right? It does not matter whether you want to make profit, right? Which is fantastic, but as you make profit, what value is there for the customer, right? Um, some of the places where you can have brand voice and tone when you're doing things like taglines, call to action, right? Or even the product description, right? Make it in such a way that is accessible to all customers, right? Don't have a situation whereby I will read the text and feel like, okay, maybe they really didn't mean me, and stop engaging with your brand, right? And a great brand message is great when it distills the essence of the product or the service, right? Um, so here we have an example of intentionality, right? So you have your name, right? So what is your company name? What is it known as informally? What are some of the taglines and descriptors, right? What are some of even the writing styles that you use when you're referring to your brand, right? I'm sure in the organizations where you work, you know that there's messaging that perhaps when you write in a certain way, then it stops making sense for what the brand intended, right? In terms of brand authenticity, so this is basically being true to your brand, right? If you say that our mission is to give a third of our profits, right, to make sure that you follow through on that promise, regardless of what it is, right? And being authentic as a brand is what makes people interested in your brand, and it keeps them coming back, right? In terms of brand coherence, so all the pieces are together. So it doesn't matter whether I have 10 brands under my parent brand, but each of them is communicating the same thing, right? So here you're looking at building trust through using a unified voice, a dynamic central idea. You have one company strategy. So each of them is not just offshooting and doing whatever it is they want, and every touch point that the customer has contact with makes sense to them, and they're able to say, okay, this is really a product of brand X, right? Because you're being treated like there is no really strong difference between those two, right? The look and feel, right? Sometimes you find that brands have different logos, different applications of the word mark, different application of the font, so you must make sure that everyone understands, right? And we'll talk about the role of brand guidelines in terms of, or how it relates to brand coherence, right? And then brand flexibility. So of course, innovation requires us to be flexible, right? So perhaps you might need to be flexible in terms of brand architecture, right? So this means that your brand identity should have legs, right? So it is something that if you decided to do brand extensions, it would make sense for whatever you choose, right? It must be relevant and recognizable. So keep it light, keep it fun, but ultimately really distilling the essence of who you are as a brand, right? So we have brand asset management. Of course, you've said that our brand needs to be protected, it needs to be preserved, and it needs to be nurtured, right? So here one, it must come from you as the founder, right? You need to be very committed, you need to be very serious about the brand, right? And then you must cascade it to your employees, really break it down to them. What does this brand stand for? What do you want the brand to be associated with, right? And the more they understand this, then you find that they align themselves to that expectation of what the brand is, and they're able to deliver on your brand promise, right? So, and case study of asset management, this is Deloitte, right? And here they have an internal website called the Deloitte Brand Experience, right? So here basically they tell you, okay, so for this campaign, this is what we did. In Africa, perhaps you launched one campaign and this is what the campaign achieved, right? So basically here on this website, they've been able to really onboard stuff about what the expectations are in terms of the brand, right? So it basically gives them a breakdown of what and what not to do when they're relating to the brand or when they're communicating about the brand, right? And that has resulted in a very strong global brand for them, right? Creating value, this is fairly self-explanatory. So you must create value. So maybe you're telling me I'm giving you seamless service, right? So your packaging should communicate that seamlessness. Your website should be part of that seamlessness. So you must uphold that value that you're saying you're creating for your consumers, right? We have brand differentiation. So we have a lot of brands that are competing for our attentions, right? So here you can differentiate your brand by one, curating the experience for your brand, right? So maybe you have a website, right? And you say that on your website, when people have FAQs first, instead of quickly turning them to the customer service, you will give them FAQs so that they're able to work out whatever issue they need to solve. So you've differentiated yourself in that way, right? Our brands must be sustainable, right? So our brands are messengers of trust, right? And we've said that, we are reassured by the logos that we know. So in our example here, you can see how the brand has evolved, right? So they remain or they kept the aspect of the deer, right? But as the company has evolved, that has been their main anchor of their logo, right? So yes, your brand may change over the years, but the key things about yourself really must remain the same to make sure that your brand is not only consistent, but coherent for your consumer, right? So lastly, we have an exercise for you. So I want you to quickly take 5 minutes to think about these things. I want you to develop a brand for products with this description. So the first is a flying school bag that you can control by remote control. We have a high speed flying carpet, and the third product is an alarm clock that switches off when you shout at it. So what will be your brand name and why will you choose that? What do you want your logo to look like? What will be your brand essence for your product? And how will you communicate your USP, right? So here I want you to share a message that you'd use to promote the brand. So I'll leave this up for 5 minutes, and then after 5 minutes, I'll be looking forward to listening to some of your responses. Sorry to feedback.
So maybe Brenda, we can maybe shorten the time because you're already 2 minutes past the hour. Maybe
Okay.
we can do it 1 or 2 minutes and then proceed to
Okay,
Q&A.
2 minutes. Okay. So I'll be picking randomly after 2 minutes.
As you are all working on the exercise, you can also drop your comments or questions in the chat box and we'll read them out once Brenda has completed her presentation.
Okay, our 2 minutes are up. I can see Daniel has given us some names. The first is control bag, air carpet, and 3-wake me. Great. So Daniel, maybe you want to explain to us what your logo would look like. You can pick one of the products and a message that perhaps you'd use to sell your brand.
Remy, you can unmute and speak.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So thank you first of all for such a wonderful presentation. So what my logo will look like for the school bag that has like a remote control, I think like a design that has a bag but has leg. Uh, the idea is like you can tell it to come, you can tell it to do whatever you want it to do. Secondly, the air cap, because the flying carpet, I think it will have something like a carpet, but this time, maybe in space or just a carpet in the air or something like that. Then the third one, the third one, I think maybe design of uh, a screaming alarm or something, alarm that is not quite that just buzzing or something like that. Thank you.
Great. Glory, tell us about Space Case.
Glory, please unmute and speak. And John, if you also would like to go ahead as Glory is picking herself up, you can unmute and speak. So if not, maybe Brenda, we can proceed. We have 7 minutes to go.
Okay. So any questions?
Okay, so we have a question here.
Mm-hmm.
From the presentation we've had, you've spoken so much about business and business and business, but we also have NGO focus as well who are attending this presentation. So I'm just wondering, from the NGO point of view, if I have an organization that I want to, let's say it's dealing with water and sanitation hygiene, how best can I brand it? And can I use my mission statement as a brand?
Yes, I know I said business, but here business can mean any organization because essentially the process is the same, right? So, what is your purpose? What is it that you want to do, right? And yeah, you're right. Your mission could be simply the thing that you want to do. So it's not really limited to business. You can apply the steps that you've spoken about for whichever engagement or whichever organization that you're looking to develop. Yeah.
So can I use the mission statement as my brand identity?
Yes, it can be part of your brand identity because your mission statement can be your USP or your tagline, right? Sometimes you could even develop it further and, find another way to put it, and then it becomes the name of your business. So it can lend itself to several things, I think.
Thank you, Brenda. So another question, a quick one. Let's say there's a company using such a brand in, let's say in Uganda, and I'm in Rwanda. Can I copy and paste the other company's logo and name? Does it have any effect
No,
on my
yes, it
product or my
does.
business?
Yes, because you see, eventually you're not just limiting yourself to Rwanda, I'm assuming, and eventually you might want to increase the scope of your brand. So think about that. Plus, in the age of social media, I don't think that is something that you really want to do because it will be very easy for you to get smoked out, right? And already, if your brand is based off what someone else is doing, then you'll be perceived as an inferior copy and people will stop engaging with you. So the best approach here is to just build something. Of course, I'm not discounting, can I say, the merit of maybe finding out what your competitors are doing, but don't lift everything. It will get you into more trouble than it will help you.
Okay. Thank you so much. I think that is it from us. And I would really like to appreciate you for finding time to be a presenter today. And we have learned so much. I'm definitely sure that our scholars are going to implement what they've been taught here and create the best brands for their organizations so that they can progress well. I don't know if you have any
Absolutely.
final remarks.
Yes, in case anyone wants to reach out, I've left my email in the chat. So anyone who might have any additional questions can reach me there. And then of course, I'm sure you'll share the presentation with the class.
Yes, definitely. We always share the presentation immediately after the sessions.
Yeah, then I think that's it for me. Thank you so much for spending this time with me and looking forward to our session on Thursday.
Thank you so much, Brenda. And to our scholars, thank you again for joining this webinar. Just maybe a quick reminder about the pitch presentation. The registration will start next week on 11th, and then submissions are due on November 30th, 2024 at 11 p.m. EST. So guys, work on your presentation and remember there are very good prizes to be won for the best pitch presentation. So looking forward to seeing your presentations then, and also looking forward to seeing you on Thursday for the next webinar. Have a good evening all. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Bye.